Go.
All right. Well, I'm going to follow Mark's advice and not do these times, so I'm just going to move through them in 6 minutes, right? So, what I've been trying to explain to myself, I think, is how I understand Agile in terms of philosophy. I've got a philosophy degree, spent 4 years doing it, one of the ways to think about this is this chap, Heraclitus, who is widely regarded as one of the very first philosophers, right? Not the first Greek philosophers, one of the first philosophers, right? And he came up with this wonderful kind of, he's known for this catchphrase, tapanda re, which means everything changes all the time. And another way of explaining that is you can't step into the same river twice, right? So you think you're stepping into something called the river, but it's a different river. Everything is changing all the time, right? Which I think is kind of, you can regard him in some ways as one of the first Agile philosophers, right? He's thinking about, right, everything's changing all the time. How do we deal with that, right? The problem is, and this is a picture of something called the Strid, which is a river in North Yorkshire that looks like you can stride across it, but if you do, you drown, basically, because it's a lot wider than it looks and a lot more dangerous. The problem was that then this chap came along, Plato. And Plato was very, very excited, and his kind of mouthpiece, this chap, Socrates, Plato was very excited about this stuff, right? So he was very excited about maths.
Pythagoras.
And Pythagoras, yeah. So he was very excited about the fact that you can know this stuff without looking at the world. And there's a brilliant dialogue that Plato wrote where Socrates talks to a servant boy and gets a servant boy to reveal some fundamental things about arithmetic. And from this, Plato got the idea that, like, actually all the important stuff that we really need to know is already in our heads. This is a real big problem for the next 2,000 years, right? Because basically what Plato is saying is, if you want to figure out how to understand the world, you have to look inwards rather than outwards. So all the stuff that Mark was talking about breaking those models, had to come very, very slowly and very, very painfully because people took an awful lot of notice of Plato, right? And Plato basically thought that all the important things in life came from kind of mathematics. One of the interesting things about Pythagoras is that he also believed you shouldn't eat beans.
Sage.
But Plato's view of the world is that the world is a poor reflection of our ideals. He had these things called forms, right? He thought the forms were the important thing, and the world was problematic, right? Does this sound familiar from software development, right? The world is this poor reflection of what's going on in our idealized mind, right? So you might think about Plato as like the first waterfall project manager, right? Now you have to go along, like, a lot of stuff happened, right, in the intervening 2,000 years, and then along came this dude, right? Ludwig Wittgenstein, born around the beginning of the 19th century, started out as an engineer, but started having all these kind of un-engineering-like thoughts about logic and mathematics. He wrote to Bertrand Russell, and he said, I'm having some thoughts about logic, here they are. Do you think I should do this philosophy thing? And Bertrand Russell wrote back to him and said, yes, right? You're really good at this stuff. Right, so Wittgenstein wrote a book in the trenches, like literally in the trenches when he was in the Austro-Hungarian army in the First World War. And what he tried to do was, he tried to figure out what the relationship was between the stuff we write down, propositions, so statements about the world, and the world. And he was really, really clever, so he thought about this really hard, and he came up with this idea that propositions are like pictures of the world, right? He started out his book, Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, with a statement, the truth is all that is the case, right? The idea being that if you make a long enough list, you can have a statement about everything that's in the world. I've got 1.5 minutes to explain the rest of Wittgenstein, right? Long story short, essentially what happened was Wittgenstein started with this notion that you could have a list of things that were in the world and you could have a one-to-one correspondence between your list and what was in the world. When he started to think about how propositions actually worked, he realised that there were pictures of the world, and that any picture is not the real world, that there are big gaps in it, right? Again, this is like requirements. and reality, right? And then in late, so there's two kinds of Wittgenstein, early Wittgenstein and late Wittgenstein. Early Wittgenstein is trying to do that. He's trying to get this direct correspondence between statements about the world and the world. Late Wittgenstein is saying all the problems we have with our philosophy is basically we don't really understand how language works. Language is not a perfect description of the world. Language is a set of tools that in the particular situation that we're in work well enough, right? So the pieces in a Monopoly board work well enough in Monopoly. The tools that we have here work well enough for the jobs that we're doing. But if we try and use these tools in Monopoly, we're going to get into all sorts of trouble, right? Or if we try and do brain surgery with these kinds of tools, we're going to get into trouble. His basic idea was that language ends up being something that's useful for the things it's used for. I can't do that, right? How long have we got? That's it. I'm going to end with one final thing. This is kind of something that comes in the end of Wittgenstein's first book. Wherever one cannot speak, there must be silent. Basically what he's saying is, the things that we can talk about usefully, we can talk about usefully. The things that we can't talk about usefully, we can't talk about.
We shouldn't talk about it.
One must be silent. Basically, in late Wittgenstein there's an addendum to that, which is, you can come up with some new language to talk about things that you've never talked about before. But that's a long, difficult, troublesome process. That's it. Sorry, I went over by 40 seconds.